It's Wednesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, the Conservative MP Damian Collins, the Labour peer Jenny Chapman, David Runciman, Professor of Politics at Cambridge University and host of the Talking Politics podcast, and the writer and commentator Timandra Harkness. Remember this?
I want to stress that this is a great deal for our country, for the UK.
Now the man who negotiated that deal says this.
The world has now moved on and we now face a very serious situation. The protocol is not working.
The danger is the people you're negotiating with think you didn't agree in good faith in the first place.
Keir Starmer tries his hand behind the HGV wheel.
You'd have failed your test.
OK, very good.
We'll ask the Labour leader's former advisor how he would make a success of Brexit.
I saw Facebook repeatedly encounter conflicts between its own profits and our safety. Facebook consistently resolved these conflicts in favour of its own profits.
Will this whistleblower change how we regulate tech companies in the UK? And should this academic lose her job over allegations of transphobia? Now, let's start with the news that the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has been handed a new unpaid role with the United Nations as a special representative to Africa. This is 4 months, of course, after resigning from the government for breaking COVID rules when his affair with an aide came to light. This is how the Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy responded to that news. On the same day, a report by the Select Committee we discussed yesterday is published criticising Matt Hancock and the government for failures that cost thousands of lives here in the UK. Absolutely staggering to see him announced as a UN Special Envoy to support Africa's recovery to the pandemic. You couldn't make it up. Fair criticism, Damian?
No, completely wrong. Matt had a huge amount of experience in rolling out the vaccine programme in the UK, the experience from doing that. That could be hugely beneficial to other countries in the world. And I think he's extremely well placed to do that. And that was something that the Select Committee reports this week highlighted as being one of the successes of the pandemic.
Do you agree with Damian or Lisa Nandy?
Well, I agree with Lisa Nandy.
Funny that.
Yeah, it will shock you to discover. I mean, let's see what he does with this role. I suspect it's a bit of a consolation prize, a token, a gesture perhaps. The government does need to get serious about vaccines in the rest of the world because we're not protected until the entire world's protected. We know that. And the government is being, rather, I think this is a very strange approach. We all have our own views on Matt Hancock, obviously. But I think, given what we learned yesterday about the UK's response to the pandemic, this will raise a few eyebrows.
Did it raise your eyebrows, Timandra, or is he a good person for this role?
Well, it did raise my eyebrows slightly because it's like, how is he going to be a constituency MP and also off to Africa helping them recover? I slightly feel that maybe he should pick one or the other. I don't know. Is he the person who I would most choose to help with a vaccine rollout? Possibly not. Do they need a vaccine rollout? Very clearly, yes. I mean, we've all been very remiss on that.
David, what's your view?
I don't want to downplay the significance of the role and the job, but it feels a bit more becoming a UN envoy ambassador, a bit more celebrity than political comeback to me. I mean, more likely to lead to a BBC travel show than a job back in the cabinet. And it's being presented as his political comeback. It doesn't feel like that to me at all.
Yes, well, a BBC travel show, we can all aspire to that, can't we, in the future? Let's leave it there and talk about relations between the EU and the UK. It's been a busy few days. The Brexit Minister, David Frost, gave a speech yesterday saying that the protocol isn't working. Later on this afternoon, we're expecting proposals about the Northern Ireland Protocol. That was part of the withdrawal agreement to keep the border open on the island of Ireland. But the proposals will be around reducing checks in some way between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Let's have a look at how a couple of the papers are covering it. The Guardian, EU to offer olive branch on Northern Ireland goods. And this Slightly different take, to say the least, in the Express. EU told your poison is wrecking Brexit rules, and a picture there of the Brexit minister. I said he gave a speech yesterday. Let's have a listen to a portion of it.
I do understand why the EU finds it difficult to come back to an agreement that was reached only 2 years ago, though obviously that in itself is far from unusual in international relations. Maybe there was a world in which the protocol could have worked, more sensitively implemented. But the world has now moved on, and we now face a very serious situation. The protocol is not working. It's completely lost consent in one community in Northern Ireland. It's not doing the thing it was set up to do. Protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. In fact, doing the opposite. It has to change.
Well, that was David Frost yesterday. Let's speak to our Northern Ireland correspondent, Emma Vardy. Emma, you'll have just heard the words there from Lord Frost outlining the serious concerns that he has. This afternoon, as I said, we're expecting proposals from the EU. Can you give us a sense of what we can expect?
Well, look, here in Northern Ireland, ever since Brexit happened, there's been lots of complaints from all sorts of businesses, whether that's hauliers, logistics, food importers, saying, look, we are dealing with these mounds of paperwork, mounds of red tape to bring goods over the Irish sea border. And that's led to all this conflict over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Some suppliers won't even send over the Irish Sea anymore because of all the bureaucracy and red tape that is involved. Now, what the EU is offering to do is provide these flexibilities which lessen that burden, lessen the amount of checks and the paperwork that's needed to get goods across, also provide more flexibility in terms of goods that are considered at risk. Those are goods which aren't going to stay in Northern Ireland and are going to enter the single market by travelling further south, and also changing the rules to allow the flow of medicines to come across the Irish Sea to Northern Ireland too. Now, the question, I suppose, is will that go far enough for people? The EU says, look, please look at these proposals very seriously. This is really going to the limits of how far we can stretch things under the current EU rules. But it isn't a new deal as such. The EU wants it to remain in the current terms of the existing Northern Ireland Protocol.
Right, so Emma, what's the reaction so far, or the mood, if you like, in the unionist community in Northern Ireland?
Well, the DUP here particularly got really burnt when the Northern Ireland Protocol was agreed because, look, it made unionists in Northern Ireland feel that they were being siphoned off from the rest of the UK. Some people here called it being pushed into an economic united Ireland. So there's always been fury from many unionists, particularly the DUP, that this protocol was ever agreed in the first place. So yes, of course, unionists will see it as a step in the right direction, that some of that sort of burden of red tape and what feels like a really hard border now between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK is going to be lessened. But Lord Frost's demands go a lot further than that. He doesn't want a changed Northern Ireland Protocol. He wants an entirely new deal, and particularly taking the role of the European Court of Justice out of this. The DUP will absolutely want that too. They've been under pressure from voters and their supporters over the fact that this kind of deal, which was which made unionists so angry, was allowed to happen at all. So the DUP will want the UK to take the hardest possible stance against the EU. So Geoffrey Donaldson, leader of the DUP, has said he could walk out of Stormont, collapse the power sharing deal here if they don't get what they want. So there's some really serious consequences that could potentially come from this.
Emma Vardy there in Belfast, thank you very much. Damien, let's just go back to sort of first principles. Ripping up an agreement that the government only signed up to and championed, heralded it, in fact, 2 years ago. People will just be incredible about that.
I think what people find incredible is the way the EU have tried to enforce the Northern Ireland Protocol. David Frost is right. There was a chance this could have worked. But to have all these checks on goods going between the UK and Northern Ireland, Great Britain and Northern Ireland, I think are unnecessary. I don't think anyone believes that moving sausage meat from Birmingham to Belfast is undermining the European single market. And it's absurd they've insisted on doing this. And it's not just a question of, does it make common sense? It is causing tensions within the community. And it undermines the principle behind the Good Friday Agreement, which is consent. Consent on both sides. And this clearly isn't working. The EU have always tried to use Ireland as a way to try and make the UK follow single market rules after we left. And I think they should abandon this. I don't think we will ever practically enforce a border in the Northern Ireland, in the Irish Sea, and there will never be a border on the island of Ireland that anyone would try and enforce. So why don't we just accept those are the realities and negotiate a proper deal on the movement of goods?
Right, so what are you expecting the EU to propose that will make it work?
Well, I don't think the EU are going to propose anything that's going to make it
hang on. So you're not going to give them a chance then?
Well, no, I think if what David Frost has set out is to say there should be like a trade agreement that governs the rules for the movement of goods on the island of Ireland, between the island of Ireland and the UK. And to try and do it in this way, where we either have a border on the Irish Sea or a border on the island of Ireland, is impractical.
But let's just remind people, the whole point of signing up to that part of the withdrawal agreement, known as the Northern Ireland Protocol, was to avoid any sort of hard border on the island of Ireland. So there had to be checks somewhere else.
Well, there don't have to be these checks at all. I think they're unnecessary. And I think it's the EU's insistence on this and the insistence on trying to enforce single market rules with the European Court of Justice, which I think has been the problem all along.
Has it been the problem all along? The European Court of Justice has only just been raised by the Brexit Minister, David Frost. Why?
Well, this issue's been raised quite a lot before, but we don't
have they had a ruling, the ECJ, over anything that's gone on?
What you don't have with trade agreements, you don't have a trade agreement where you say, OK, I'm going to have a trade agreement with you, but my courts will determine any disputes, not yours. It'll be entirely down to my interpretation whether I think there's been a breach or not. That's not how trade works internationally.
Right. Make Brexit work. That's what Labour's saying. What would you do?
Well, I mean, I think we want to have veterinary agreement for a start, which would overcome an awful lot of the problems that we've had with checks on trade, which is, to be fair, where a lot of the concerns around the protocol have been. It is only the last sort of few days where the issue of the ECJ has suddenly become the be-all and end-all.
But the veterinary agreement, let's be clear, I mean, this would really be following EU rules on trade in animal products and agri-foods. That would be aligning with the European Union on rules for the whole of GB on those issues.
But if you have a good negotiation, you may be able to achieve something that's a little bit more flexible than that.
And what would that be, though, Jenny? Because actually, when you look at that, that would be what it would mean in practice, is that the whole of Great Britain would then be aligned with EU rules.
We could try and talk to the EU, and we could talk about mutual recognition. We could talk about how we could make this work. We need to get in the mindset of making this work. That's where the EU says it's going to be this afternoon. Let's see. But we need to have a very different type of debate with the EU. The UK has said all along that it doesn't wish to depart from the standards that the EU has, and we do not wish to see any diminution of our environmental standards, our animal welfare standards, our food standards, food safety standards. The NFU and the Food and Drink Federation are all being very, very clear that they need those standards to preserve the integrity and the quality of our products. So why we should be quite so worried about all of this isn't clear to anybody.
Well, why should the EU be worried about it? If we agree that we've got broadly common standards, what is it that is so damaging to the integrity of the single market they're trying to protect?
Damien,
that's why they're insisting on all of
but
this.
That to me is the basis of a worthwhile negotiation and conversation to have. Unfortunately, what we've seen is this sort of aggravated, flying to Lisbon yesterday to make a speech that didn't honestly say very much. The day before, Lord Frost knew fine well that these proposals were going to be published. That is not acting in good faith and building a relationship of trust to have the conversation that you and I think, could possibly start to have.
But I think one of the problems there, I think the EU have got to be really clear that the view of the government and the view certainly of the unionist community in Northern Ireland is the current settlement is not workable, not sustainable.
Well, and no one's arguing that nothing can change. Nobody is arguing that. The Labour Party isn't arguing that. We're in make this work territory. We need to be very, very sensitive to the needs and the views of the unionist community. Like the Labour Party of anybody understands that, and but we think that it's possible. What we see from Lord Frost is almost a wish to not make this work and to keep the aggravation going and to keep politics stuck where it was in 2019. And that's we don't accept that. We think that we can do better and move forward.
What would you say to the unionist parties, though, Jenny, who they have stated they want the Northern Ireland Protocol rejected in its entirety, so it doesn't have the support of that whole community. So you backing it wouldn't solve that problem.
Well, it depends what they see as the alternative, because the Northern Ireland Protocol was there to protect the Good Friday Agreement. Now, I'm not saying there weren't other solutions that were possible. The Labour Party at the time was proposing other solutions. But, this is what we have now. This does, at the moment, this is what we have protecting that agreement and preventing the border. There may be other ways to move forward with this. We are not ruling those out, but we do think that the quality of dialogue has got so poor and so poisoned that's a barrier.
But that's
to
the quality of dialogue,
solutions.
Damien. What about then equivalence? What about further alignment with the EU? Is that something that you would discuss?
Well, Brexit, if it means anything at all, is managing the process of divergence from the EU and the ability to set different rules. The question is any breach so serious here that it requires the sorts of enforcement measures the EU are insisting on? I think we could all agree that the island of Ireland works as a market for many goods, that many businesses trade with each other on the island of Ireland all the time. It'd be relatively easy to monitor that regime without all the border checks that are coming in. And I think the continued insistence on effectively trying to create a border in the Irish Sea creates a series of, it's not just economic challenges, but political problems in Northern Ireland as well. And I think the EU has got to recognise that.
OK, but so the briefing ahead of the proposals that are going to be published this afternoon do signal to me, at least, that there is some movement there from the EU. If there is movement from the EU this afternoon, I think the right thing to do is to welcome that and try and use that as a basis on which to move forward.
All right.
And not to just reject it out of
Let me bring our other guests in. David, do you see this whole debate and crisis, really, as growing pains in the Brexit world? Or is there something more fundamental that can't be resolved?
I think there is something more fundamental, and it's familiar in a way, because the British government has consistently treated this as a question of politics. It's about consent. We've heard that language. It's about some very vocal constituencies, some of which have the power to vote people out of office. And the EU sees this as a question of rules. This is about treaties and procedures and process, because that's what the EU is. The EU is a rule-based, treaty-based organisation. And I don't think anyone has bridged that gap. And you see that acutely now. I think the British government has calculated that politics will win in the end, that saying political reality on the ground can't survive this. But it's a dangerous game, because the EU at a certain point will hold the line that without the rules, it is nothing. And I think this is actually, I think the stakes here are quite high. And I don't think it's going to be easy to resolve, because they are talking a different language. I mean, that is the problem. It's politics versus process. And politics doesn't always win. The people on the side of process can, apart from anything else, dig in their heels too.
Right. I mean, it's interesting, Timandra, in the speech yesterday, David Frost talked about populism. He said, that's why I don't see anything wrong with Brexit being described as a populist policy. If populism means doing what people want, challenging a technocratic consensus, then I am all for it. What do you make of that?
Well, yeah, in a way, that's saying, I think, the same thing as David just said in slightly different language, that you have politics, which is the expressed will of voters in a democracy, and then you have process, you have rules, you have a kind of managerial approach, which absolutely is what the EU is set up to be. It was set up so that people could manage running things without having to have too much interference from the demos voting. And then they rashly gave us a chance to vote with Brexit, and here we are. I mean, practically, I kind of wishing that we'd been having these kinds of actual conversations about how to make this work 5 years ago, instead of, I think, a lot of people hoping that Brexit wouldn't actually happen. But it's a slightly anomalous situation. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of the island of Ireland. And so the island of Ireland is part of, in a way, is part of both the United Kingdom and of the European Union. And both sides are going to have to recognise that, I think, and be a bit flexible and a bit reasonable if we're going to get something that will work. Because, I mean, to turn it around, if you said to Ireland, the Irish Republic, I'm sorry, now, because we don't want a hard border, you have to do checks on everything that comes into you from the European Union. And if there's a dispute, you have to be ruled by the British courts. I think they would rightly be outraged.
Yes.
So, I think we have to look at this in a balanced way in that sense.
Well, Jenny, picking up on what Timandra and David have said, people want conversations which we should have had perhaps a few years ago, rather than people who wanted Brexit to be stopped.
I absolutely agree with that.
Like Keir Starmer. I mean, he was the shadow. Well, he was the shadow Brexit minister who did want a second referendum at the least.
In the very, very end, where there was a complete impasse and it didn't look like there was another way forward. The government was in a complete mess, as you remember, and it was a way of breaking the deadlock.
But
you
now
will also remember us holding out, in face of great criticism against adopting that position.
Has Keir Starmer, though, now really got it on Brexit? Those comments made by David Frost. I mean, has Keir Starmer learnt the lesson about what it is people wanted when they voted to leave the EU?
Oh, I mean, Brexit's happened. You know, we have to get out of this mindset of having that argument. But I think the government did quite well out of that argument, actually, and doesn't mind us staying stuck in that loop. But the Labour Party, and Keir in particular, you know, understands that we have left the European Union. You know, we need to make this work now. He led the Labour Party to vote for the deal to make that point. You know, we have to move on. And our sort of future prosperity and security as a country depends on how we conduct ourselves now on the world stage with our nearest international partners in particular. You know, we're being judged on this. We want to do trade deals around the world with new countries. They're looking at the way we conduct ourselves, so we need to up our game.
But I think people who are looking in on this would think actually the EU position, I think, is an unreasonable and unworkable one. I agree with what David said there, that actually if the EU's backstop position on this is to say, well, if you don't agree to the Northern Ireland Protocol, to use that term...
I was going to say, let's not go back to backstop.
If you don't agree on that, then we will basically enforce a border on the island of Ireland. Everyone knows they will never do that, and it would be impossible to do.
But hold on, you're mischaracterising what's being said, and they have said we're going to publish some pragmatic proposals this afternoon.
Let's wait
and
see what those proposals are, and I'm sure we'll pick up on it tomorrow, because we're going to talk about Facebook. We showed you a little clip there of the whistleblower Frances Haugen at the start of the programme. She has accused the social media giant of putting profits before safety. Let's listen to a little bit more of her evidence she gave to a Senate hearing in the US last week.
I saw Facebook repeatedly encounter conflicts between its own profits and our safety. Facebook consistently resolved these conflicts in favor of its own profits. The result has been more division, more harm, more lies, more threats, and more combat. In some cases, this dangerous online talk has led to actual violence that harms and even kills people.
Frances Haugen there. Let's show you this BBC News story. Facebook whistleblower to appear before UK Parliament because she's going to be appearing before the Online Safety Bill Committee later this month. That's the group of peers and MPs examining the government's legislation that aims to tackle harmful content online. You're chairing that committee, Damien. Why do you want to hear from her?
Because I've spoken to Frances Haugen. She's got a huge amount of experience from inside of Facebook, and in particular dealing with a very important problem that's part of online safety, which is not just content moderation, but looking at the active role companies like Facebook play in promoting content to people. What people experience and see is personalised for them based on what the company thinks it wants them to see. But if that is a vulnerable teenager who has been exposed to images of self-harm or that glorify self-harm, the chances are the company will serve more of that to them. I think the research that she's published as well is absolutely crucial. With Facebook and Instagram are doing research looking at the impact their services have on young users. Yes. They're saying that a third of teenagers feel feelings of depression and anxiety. Sure. But crucially, and this is the chilling thing in it, they know this happens. They're not correcting it, but actually they say, but it's okay because they feel so addicted to the app they can't stop using it. So from a business point of view, we don't have to address this harm. As a father of a 14-year-old girl, I find that particularly shocking.
Right, and how does that relate to the online safety bill here?
Because the work of the committee and the work of the bill is to create an effective system of content moderation. So that's about both what content should be removed because it's harmful, but also the systems the companies adopt in order to promote that content. So regulation should include both content removal and guidance on that, but also telling the companies when they shouldn't be amplifying harmful stuff to vulnerable people.
Right, and regulation is the tricky area.
Well, that's what the bill's all about, is creating a statutory regulator, which would be Ofcom, which would have legal powers to work with the companies, understand what their policies are and take down, insist on high standards for prescribed areas of harmful content, and have the powers to audit and inspect the companies. So we could be in the position where the kind of research that Frances Haugen is publishing, a regulator would have access to in the future, and that's what we should see.
Happy with that, Timandra?
No, I think I have some concerns with the online harms bill in its current form. I mean, I think it's called actually, isn't it called the Online Safety Bill at the moment?
So that's fine.
Which I think is quite an interesting change of terminology. I think what it's essentially trying to do is exert some control over what we see and read online, but outsource that job to companies. So instead of actually saying, well, we don't trust these big international companies to set standards, and we are going to tell you what is tolerable and what is not online, and if anything else comes through, then you're blocked. It's actually outsourcing responsibility to the companies by giving them a duty of care, which is drafted in from a completely different kind of set of circumstances. Like, if I go and work on a building site, the employer has a duty of care to make sure I don't fall off the scaffolding. Looking at a website is a rather different thing. But it leaves governments in a position where they can lean on companies to be responsible for the content in a slightly vague way. But then the companies are in trouble if they don't preempt content that might be harmful by some very loose definition. So it's going to push the companies towards more censorship and more control. If we're saying we don't actually trust these companies to make good judgments about what we should be seeing and reading, then why are we going to put more pressure on them to exert more control? I think it's completely the wrong way to go about it.
Damien?
Well, I don't agree with that, actually. What the bill does, it prescribes illegal content that has to be removed.
Right, illegal, fine.
Yeah, illegal.
What about content that's deemed to be harmful but not illegal?
Well, that can be both the certain aspects of content. I mean, cyberbullying is a good example of that. And that can also be a systems effect from the platform. If someone is being bombarded with information over a long period of time. You know, if we look at, say, what happened in Washington on the 6th of January with the insurrection there, the words "stop the steal" are not necessarily harmful content. It's not necessarily hate speech.
Right.
But a systems effect to organise an insurrection where 5 people died, you know, that is a harmful piece of incitement. And what are the responsibilities of platforms there? At the moment, we have basically have a situation where the platforms can say, well, this is user-to-user content. We are neutral. We're not involved in this. And that's not the case, because they are curating content. They're directing people to content. They've created the systems that people can use. So the key area, what we're working on as a committee, I think, is to say where we're saying there is a certain category of content which is harmful but not illegal. I think we need to be quite specific about what we mean about that and what we expect the companies to do. But this is absolutely Parliament and the government setting standards and giving a regulator the power to impose those standards on companies. That is absolutely, we're not leaving it to themselves. I think they've demonstrated that they can't do this on their own.
Are you reassured by that, Timandra?
Well, no, I mean, I think that's a slightly misleading description, because the regulator will be there to check whether the companies have done things after the event. And so the companies would be in a position of, well, this content is not illegal, but will it be deemed harmful at some future point by some government because of some consequence of it being here? We had better preemptively remove it. And so you are basically handing to the companies a kind of unlimited responsibility to remove things and stop us seeing things. And I just think that's the worst of both worlds, because you're neither being transparent about what exactly is it that we're not meant to see. I mean, far from everybody who saw the Stop the Steal things got involved in armed insurrection. So at what point do you say this content is too dangerous for ordinary people to look at? But you're not actually being transparent about setting that standard, and you are expecting companies to enforce it at peril of very large fines.
Do you accept that, Damien?
No, I don't, because what the regulator's job is to do is, apart from the legal content, its first job is to work with the companies and say, what are your policies? What will you say you will do? At the moment, part of the problem is they don't enforce their own policies effectively. So we have a really clear understanding of what the companies say they'll do, what the law says, and then a series of prescribed areas of priority harms, which are really clear. And I think part of the job of the Joint Committee is to try and, I think, report back and make clear what we think those should be.
Right, but David, do you think there is a difficulty here? I mean, there's some clear categories between what is harmful, what is illegal, and then what Timandra is talking about, which is where you could be accused as a tech company of fuelling an insurrection, or at what point could you stop that sort of content going out? Would that be left up to the companies to do? Do you think that is possible to regulate?
No, frankly, I think it is extremely difficult. Facebook does put profits above safety. It is based on addictive behaviours. Its business model is to have us addicted to its products. And so trusting it to somehow rectify these harms, it seems to me we wouldn't ask tobacco companies to regulate the harms that they produce. And this isn't that different, except the difference is it's much harder to regulate, because with tobacco companies, we can tax the product, but these products are free. There's very little competition. Facebook buys up its rivals rather than being out-competed by them. And it has too much power. I mean, that seems to me the basic problem here. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg has too much unaccountable power. It's a very top-down autocratic organisation. It's very secretive. And I think there's a limit to what the UK Parliament can do. I think it's great that whistleblowers are invited. I think airing these issues is really important, and more public knowledge is important too. But it's probably the US government that has to act here. And I don't think it has the appetite. I don't think the Biden administration has shown the appetite. And this gets kind of wound up with much bigger questions. I've been told that the US government actually thinks that regulating the big tech companies might leave it behind China in the great AI war, the race to AI. And those questions take priority. So awareness is good. I think we need to know that there are real harms being caused here. But regulating these companies by expecting them to change their behaviour seems to me to be a fairly hopeless endeavour.
Right, a hopeless endeavour. Limit to what you can do.
Well, no, that's why we're creating a regulator with the power to audit companies, to see what's going on, to impose massive fines of 10% of global turnover if they get things wrong, they don't comply with the regime. This gives us something we've never had before, which is the ability to actually understand what's going on inside the companies and to make them responsible for their content and to impose penalties if they're not. And so that is a big step forward, and we could be, I think, the first country in the world to create a regime like that.
Right. Do you share... Yeah, sorry, David, go.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I don't want to sort of downplay the significance. Everything starts with small steps, but we have to understand what we're dealing with here. These companies change the way they operate on a daily basis. I mean, how they actually process information and share it with their users is something that they're constantly adapting. And they have shown with tax regimes an extraordinary ability to wriggle out from under national obligations. Of course, we should do everything we can. But I do think that this is going to be challenging, and part of this has to be international. And it does, I'm afraid, depend a lot on the appetite of the US government. I think if Elizabeth Warren was president, we might be in a different space, but she isn't. Joe Biden is, and I suspect he's got other priorities.
Is it a hopeless endeavour, Jenny?
I don't think it is. I think this is too important to write off as a hopeless endeavour. You know, when you have young women who have serious body image problems because of their engagement with social media platforms, then having diet pills marketed directly at them as a consequence of algorithms, and there's no oversight, we're not able to see, the regulator is able to see what's happening. We can't just say that's too difficult. You know, we've got to engage with this and find solutions.
Difficult or not effective, I think, is the point, unless you've got a country like the US and the Biden administration behind it in terms of taking on the tech companies and who is deciding who regulates them.
So let's decide what we want to do as a country first. Let's talk to the United States about what they may wish to do. I don't think this argument about its stifling investment in AI really holds. I think we ought to be investing far more in AI, actually. I think that should be a priority for us as a country now anyway. But that in no way prevents us from saying we want to protect our young people.
Tamandra?
I think there certainly is room for a lot more democratic oversight of what big companies do, given that the public space now is so largely online. And if you value having a public space for free and open debate, as I do, then we have to face the fact a lot of that happens online, a lot of that happens in social media, and at the moment it is left up to private companies to decide what is and isn't acceptable discourse and behaviour there, which I think is completely wrong. So I'm very much in favour of more democratic oversight of technology. But the reason I'm so doubtful about the online safety bill is that precisely it wants to be seen to be doing something about this issue without any elected politician actually taking responsibility for it, and that's why it's being outsourced onto the very companies that are doing these things in the first place.
All right, Damien, your final word?
Well, I don't think we're taking politicians out of the process that are elected, because we're legislating to create the regime, and Parliament will ultimately be responsible for it, and that level of democratic oversight is important. The regulator will be the active partner, but it'll be Parliament that decides.
And we'll be following it very closely. Let me just show you this headline in The Times. Universities Union backs trans rights over threatens Sussex professor Kathleen Stock. Kathleen Stock is a professor of philosophy at Sussex University. There has been an anonymous campaign which has included posters being put up near the university accusing her of transphobia, a claim that she rejects because of her views on gender identity. She doesn't believe it's possible for a person to change their biological sex. She was defended by Adam Tickle, the Vice-Chancellor at Sussex University a few days ago, who said that staff at the university have an untrammelled right to say and believe what they think. But yesterday, following a statement which was released by the University and College Union representatives, Stock tweeted, Kathleen Stock, that the union had effectively ended her career at Sussex. Let's just show you part of that statement and what she was referring to. It says, "We urge our management to take a clear and strong stance against transphobia at Sussex. Now, it does go on to say, we do not endorse the call for any worker to be summarily sacked, and we oppose all forms of bullying, harassment and intimidation of staff and students. There should be no contradiction between defending academic freedom and support of trans rights. Now, some people don't agree with that end bit of the statement. Let's talk to Emilia Jones. She is the Trans and Non-Binary Student Officer at the University of Sussex Student Union. Welcome to you, Emilia. The posters and social media campaign that Professor Stock makes trans students feel unsafe. Do you agree with that?
I feel there's a strong feeling within the community at Sussex that having a lecturer such as Professor Stock at Sussex, who has signed the Women's Declaration of Sex-Based Rights, which in Article 1C wants to eliminate trans people in law and wants to stop all teaching of trans rights in British schools or trans identities in British schools. And I think when a professor like that is employed by a university, the trans students feel that if someone is allowed to hold their view, those views there, that they do not feel safe with a professor who holds such views.
Right. Now, does that mean intellectually unsafe or physically threatened?
It's intellectually, when you have not physically threatened, but someone who is campaigning, because they are also on the board of trustees for the LGB Alliance, who many do feel to be an anti-trans hate group. Therefore, having someone around your university and teaching a module such as for feminist philosophy, people have changed courses due to her, have changed their academic courses. People have not attended her modules due to the strong disagreement with her views.
But what do you say then to people who suggest we're getting to a place where some opinions are too damaging to express? Does everyone have to agree?
I think one important understanding and distinction we need to make is the difference between academic freedom and freedom of speech. As academic freedom is the meaning that researchers at universities must not have their research impinged or censored, either by the institution or by extra forces. But in a university setting, free speech is routinely compromised in favour of other forces. Most of the theoretical and legal basis for these decisions is feminist critique of sexual harassment. As sexual harassment was initially resisted as a compromise to freedom of speech.
All right. Yes. Sorry, go and finish your sentence.
I understand, but feminists argued that universities have a duty to protect students and workers from sexual harassment and other forms of discrimination in the classroom.
All right, Emilia, stay with us. David, listening to that, do you agree with that distinction of academic freedom and freedom of speech?
I mean, I think there are lots of ways in which people can be censored, and it's not just censoring by official bodies. I'm speaking to you from a university. I'm in my office in the Cambridge Politics Department, and I am very conscious that this is an extremely difficult topic for me to discuss because there is real anxiety around this. There's real anxiety about getting the language wrong. There's real anxiety about finding oneself accused of provocations when what one is trying to do is to find a shared language. And at the moment, there isn't a shared language for this. So we can all talk about, I think, academic freedom. We know what we're meant to say. We're in favor of academic freedom. We're against bullying. We believe in the rights of disadvantaged and minorities. We can all talk that language. But when people who are on different sides of this argument, and there really are different views about this argument, try and find a language to have that conversation, it doesn't currently exist. I host a podcast where the point of our podcast is to try and get beyond partisan politics, to talk about things in a way where there can be a shared language. We've got people on either side of the Brexit divide to have civil conversations. We don't dare touch this question. And I deeply regret that. And I think the UCU statement, whatever you think about the merits of the argument, the tone of that statement does nothing to make people feel more confident that there would be a way of talking across this divide. And if you can't talk across this divide, you can't talk about it at all.
Tamandra, you're raising your eyebrows there. I'll come back to you, Emilia, in just a moment.
I was just horrified that David's podcast, which I'm a fan of, actually, it has not been able to address this issue. Ironically, I was chairing a public event, a debate about hate speech, heresy and free speech on Saturday morning, and Kathleen Stott was due to be speaking at it and contacted us on the Friday to say that she was unable to attend. I think the police have advised her not to be in public places where her presence has been advertised. So I had to read out a statement from her. And then the horrible thing was we proceeded to have a very civil and public discussion of what free speech was, why it mattered, how one should defend it or not defend it, if there were limits on it, if people might have been excluded in the past from involvement in debates and what you could do about that and so on, to which she would only have added, and that was exactly the kind of debate that we should be having. I think there are two slightly separate issues here. I think there is what Kathleen Stott's position is on trans rights, and ironically I have read her recent book Material Girls, and in it she does attempt to do that, to find a common language where we can have these discussions and actually try and give everybody the maximum rights and freedoms that are due to them as humans. But I think the issue of whether somebody should be free to teach philosophy while holding opinions that students and other faculty deeply object to is an extraordinary thing that we should even be discussing. The idea that because you object to somebody's opinions, they should not have a teaching job in a university, I find amazing. What is a philosophy department for, if not to be a place where you can discuss these issues in good faith and disagree in a setting where everybody feels physically safe to be in a room and disagree?
Well, Emilia, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, but I think the major issue here is, which is the matter of academic freedom as well, is that a group of students were using their democratic right to put up posters and to campaign for something they believe in. And a vice-chancellor of a university, as you all say, freedom of speech is this thing which is vital and discussions should be had. But just because people have put up masks, Adam Tickell, the vice-chancellor, has said any reaction must be taken. And this is blatantly an abusive and oppressive speech act designed to suppose dissent.
Emilia, on that, do you accept, though, as David was saying, that there are different views on this issue and that people should be allowed to debate them?
This comes back to the thing about freedom of speech versus
well, but should people with different views on this issue be allowed to express them and debate them?
I feel that it is needed, but as well, we need to remember that these are people's identities being debated. It's not just in issues such as climate change. These are people's identities, people's experiences, and it's not something which is emotionally hard for some people to debate, having their very own rights, very own identities up for discussion.
Emilia, we're going to have to say goodbye to you at this point because we're almost out of the show. Just a brief word from the politicians on this. Listening to this debate, what's your reaction?
I mean, I have a lot of admiration for Emilia for having the guts to come on national TV and talk about this issue. I think there is a generational difference here in the way this subject is approached. But I just come back to this thing that you cannot have a debate which pits groups against each other like this, when we should be working through these issues together. And the fact that the language isn't there, that people feel unable to even talk about this subject, that doesn't help anybody.
And do politicians have to have a stance on this?
Well, I think politicians will be increasingly asked, but unless there's a common language, you can't have a debate. And at the moment, what we're seeing is people are, I think, frightened to say anything about it at all, for want of giving offence.
We've run out of time, but thank you very much to all of my guests today. I will be back at the same time tomorrow at 12:15. Please join me then. Bye-bye.